Welcome to Risk Engineers Talk Governance. In this episode, due diligence engineers Richard Robinson and Gaye Francis discuss due diligence for bushfires. We hope you enjoy their chat. If you do, please give us a rating and subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. If you'd like more information on R2A's work or have any feedback or topic ideas, please head to the website r2a.com.au.
Hi Richard, welcome to another podcast session.
Good morning, Gaye.
Good morning. Today what we thought we'd talk about is bushfire risk, and we're getting into the hot part of the year, and bushfire season is fast approaching, although speaking to CFA a number of years ago, they're saying that the bushfire season seems to be getting longer and longer, and the ability to prepare for such bushfire seasons is getting shorter. Time-wise.
And also some of the CFA caps that we talked to, getting volunteers is not the way it used to be either.
No, that's very true. People aren't living in their community as much, are they, and helping out?
I was sort of particularly interested, as I commented. I was busy down at my daughter and son-in-law's place mowing and slashing on the weekend because they live in the bush in Gippsland, and making sure that their house is clear and all those good things you're supposed to do.
So helping out.
Yeah.
So what we thought we'd talk about today was the bushfire risk, and then the controls that you can put in place to mitigate against those. And I guess our involvement, well, Richard's involvement in particular, started very early on after the Ash Wednesday fires in, what'd you say, 83? 1983.
Thank you for reminding me of that.
And then we've had some other involvement in bushfire sort of assessments over time, particularly the Black Saturday bushfire in 2009, and we were part of the Royal Commission, which we've talked about previously in the electrical distribution podcast that we did.
Well, the thing that was interesting about that, at the time I was working for GHD with my then business partner, who was the principal planner, or became my business partner, and I was the senior risk engineer. And we'd written a paper after Ash Wednesday, so presumably it would have been in 84, maybe 85, basically summarising a vulnerability approach to bushfire risk management. And we dug it out because, and I must say, my son looked at the paper and said, gee, that's an old format. That's a really old paper, isn't it?
It almost likes typeset rather than computer set, Richard.
Well, the picture's sketched by hand, isn't it?
It is. Anyway, we don't...
Anyway, but what I found completely fascinating is that we then sort of downloaded some stuff from bushfire best practice from CSIRO and local planning for bushfire protection from Environment, Land, Water and Planning. And they also have adopted the vulnerability approach, which is the very military intelligence approach, which basically is a criticality-driven approach. It doesn't ask the question how likely something is, because bushfires are basically generational, but you know that they will happen. It's a bit like the Powerline Bushfire Safety Task Force work, and the REFCLs, or ground fault neutralisers. They've apparently worked very well from what your feedback was.
Correct.
And has stopped the likelihood of bushfire starts from electrical faults on the network. But that doesn't stop bushfires.
No, because we know that bushfires are started for a whole lot of reasons, often human-related.
Well, I thought the one that always abused me was this. I told you people, driving somewhere to go to Eildon or go down to the Gippsland Lakes or something like that, about an hour and a half out of Melbourne, the bearing on their trailer gets so hot that it bursts into flame, and then they pull over on the side of the road and the bushfire starts. It is a source of frustration to the CFA. I've had this explained to me several times.
So I guess from a due diligence viewpoint, we know that bushfires start. So then what are all the controls that you can put in place? And I think one of the interesting things about this is it's really not the threat of the bushfire itself, it's the interaction of a community or people with the bushfire, isn't it? And I think we talked about it in the planning, urban planning sort of one, where we talked about major hazards. It's that vulnerability, and what do you call it, the peri-urban.
The peri-urban, where the bush and the people interact, and I think I mentioned the previous one. If you read Luke's Bushfires in Australia from CSIRO, he sort of points out in the 30s, if you're around Melbourne, it was the sort of Sandringham sort of places, and then in the 80s and 90s it was Gembrook and places like that. And in 2010 it was Marysville and Kinglake and places like that, where people have been moving into the bush, and there was poor access, poor water, all those sorts of things, but a very nice place to live otherwise.
I've even noticed on news and talking about, people are going out to live in those places, but they're not necessarily inverted commas, country people that have, often if you've been involved in a bushfire, you move on. You typically don't rebuild where you've moved on.
You move back into the suburbs because you don't do it twice.
Yeah. So the people that are living in these areas are often newbies. So I've noticed even on the commercial radio and news and TVs and stuff like that at the moment, they're doing a lot of educational pieces around that. Prepare your house like you went down to your daughter's on the weekend and made sure everything was cleared around the house, and make sure you've got a plan on those
Correct.
days. Are you going to evacuate? So I thought what we do is we just go through, I guess, your threat and vulnerability assessment.
Yep.
So you're doing due diligence all the way back in
Well,
those
we didn't
times.
call it that.
But it was the
We're
right thing.
just making sure that all reasonable practical controls are in place. And I think the one that always jumped out, because it was partly because Kevin was the town planner, was that the way the bushfires happen, you get a hot northerly and you get the bushfire coming south. And then when they get the wind change, it goes from west to east. So if you're on the downside of that long, skinny fire, you're suddenly at risk. So from the point of view of a township in the bush, you don't want developments to the north or the west. And golf courses to the west, when the grass keeps growing and things like that, just gave you a big fire break. Or potato fields, or something that is not there at the height of summer.
Right. And is that carried through, do you think, to most townships now? Or
Oh, that's what, when you read these bushfire risks and best practice guide and all these sorts of things like that, I think it's pretty much doing it. They're ignoring the likelihood side, as you pointed out, and it's all being driven by the vulnerability on a criticality basis.
so I guess that's part of the protection. We talked about recalls potentially as
Ignition source control.
Ignition source control in relation
And
to
that's
power
likelihood,
lines.
though.
I guess the golf courses and stuff is part of the prevention, but a lot of work is being done around the mitigations, isn't it? The minimisation of the consequences. And I think after Black Saturday, a lot of the building codes put in place bushfire attack level, and there are requirements to then
Building control, how the house should be resistive. Like you should have a tin roof, desirably, clear your gutters out, fill them with water if you feel like it, and have a non-combustible structure.
And I think they were trying to stop the fire getting under the house as well, so you had to have it sort of blocked in, so there was no distance. So there's been a lot of work done around those things. Bushfires aren't going to go away with
Not in
climate
South East
change.
Australia.
With climate change, they're saying that they're becoming more likely.
More intense too, but that's part to do with the fact we haven't been doing enough burning off. I mean, it's one of the complications. Everyone recognised that you should keep fuel loads down, but the window to do the fuel load burning is the CFAs again, because the fire season getting longer. There's less time to do that, and you may recall there's been some instance where it was the burning off that got away that's caused the fire, which is obviously somewhat of an embarrassment.
Yeah.
So it's actually got complicated, and it's not getting any easier. And as we also commented too, that the number of volunteers for the CFA is probably generally declining, and there's some other issues associated with that that haven't been thought through.
The ability to do some of this planning work that they've relied on to minimise the consequences is getting harder and harder to do.
Remember, the CFA was created as a result of 1939 fires, and one of the consequences of that was that small fires tend to get put out. But it's when the big fire happens, there's not enough firefighters to go around and to stop the small fire from becoming a big fire. So that there's sort of an obvious size, and the way we've been doing it, it's like I think I commented, since they've gone total days of total fire ban, there's never not been a black, ash or red day that wasn't on a total fire ban day. And the ability to call it now, and particularly catastrophic day, has got really, really good. So, talking to my daughter, the plan is, on a total fire ban day, the kids and my daughter are probably gone. And if it's a catastrophic day, everybody's gone.
And you've got to go early.
Early.
Because we've talked about that in other cases as well. It's the access to some of these places that is really tricky. And being the ability for people to get out, if they leave it too late, almost disappears.
You can't, because there's trees down everywhere. I mean, the storms of winter, they've got trees down all over the place, and you have to do a U-turn and go around the other way.
So I guess our advice, if you want to call that, prep your house.
Yep.
But if you are given a warning to leave on a bushfire day, I think that's probably...
And the way they're doing it now, you will get a message on your phone.
It's very clever, isn't it? They've done a lot of work around that.
So, yeah, I, from our point of view, I mean, it was a generation ago I wrote that paper, and so far as we can tell, most of the things in that paper have been done. It's sort of interesting to sort of say all these things at that time, but at another level, it's a little bit frustrating.
I think the important thing is to make sure that we continue to talk about these things, though, because they don't go away.
No, it's
and
not
as you
gonna go
said, the bushfire only comes up every 25 or 30 years, and unless you've been involved, you don't sort of think that it's going to happen to you. But all of these controls remain robust and remain relevant. That I think it's really important to keep talking about them.
Yep.
So thank you for joining us today, Richard, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Gaye.